Well, hello there, and welcome to another edition of Under the Cowling, where we kind of step behind the scenes a little bit and get into in depth to some of these airframes. And I've got two guys here who we can talk about theoretical stuff. They actually lived it. You know, Frank and Gordy here. Now, Gordo actually has his name on the frame rail, and Frank, you also flew the F-105. How did you get started in aviation? Maybe Frank, you can start. I mean, you retired as a captain. Did you retire as a captain? Yeah. And Gordo, you retired as a colonel, right? Okay. So how did you end up in the USAF, the United States Air Force?
I lived in Chicago at the time, and a friend of mine, it was springtime, May of 1959. Wow, 1959. And somebody told me that a new drive-in restaurant started up on the north side of Chicago, and I went up there, and O'Hara's there, and at the time O'Hara had a squadron of F-86Ds, and I went up there, and we were having dinner, sitting on the back of our car, smoking cigarettes, talking to girls, and this flight of 4 F-86Ds in echelon come flying over us. And I remember looking up and said, I got to do that. And a couple of days later, I went to a recruiting office.
Really?
That was it, yeah. That was May, October, I was in the Air Force in pilot training.
Really?
Yeah.
Where'd you do pilot training at?
Of course, Lackland initially, and then Marietta, Florida, which was a civilian base. Marietta, Florida was in the Panhandle. And then Reese Air Force Base in the middle of Texas for my T-33 flying.
T-33, we got one of those. We just did an episode on that on the other program. Yeah. And Gordo, where did you start out at? How'd you do this?
Well, I grew up in Baton Rouge, and my parents took me to an air show at the Baton Rouge airport, and the Thunderbirds were there flying 100s. I'll to this day never understand how they could get in and out of a 5,000-foot runway, but they did. But I was so impressed by the airplanes, the air show, and those nice flight suits. And I actually tried out for the Thunderbirds twice, but I only made the semis. The people that were picking were all Air Force Academy graduates, and I was from LSU, so I wasn't going to get there.
Yeah, that's we don't want to go after the Academy guys, but the Academy guys get the pick of the litter. They always do, and that just is what it is. So how did you? Well, before we get any further, Greg, who my wonderful assistant and the tech guy here, who's over off camera, is always a stickler for hospitality. He tries to kill me with a drink each week on Warbird Wednesday, but you have a wet nap, so if you feel a little peaked, you can wipe down.
Is this in the budget?
This is in the budget. And then you have a nice cookie in case your blood sugar is down. And of course, he always wants to make you properly hydrated, so you have a sparkling water there. I'm going to open this one.
I think I'm enjoying it.
There you go.
It's nice and cool.
Well, how did you? The 105. And behind us is bureau number 61108. This is Combat Kathy. We'll talk about. I actually met Combat Kathy, believe it or not, when we.
I did too. You introduced me to her.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah. And we've restored this airplane. It's been about 10 years now, going on 10 years. It was one of the 12 aircraft that was retired for security training. I think was it at Lackland? Kelly. It was at Kelly. And we have a picture of that in one of the other videos of them actually flying in on their retirement flight. And when we did the research on this, a little background for our viewers at home, Gordo, you called me up, actually, I think, and said, I think I flew that airplane. And you actually flew this airplane over Hanoi, I think, right?
I don't remember exactly where it was, but I have it in my logbook, yeah.
What are the odds?
Yeah.
If you think about that.
We need to let everyone know. You look at the name and you say, oh my goodness, that's locked in history. Well, not really. It is because it's painted there, but every time a guy would come in to fly, he'd get an airplane with his name on the side. And then when he left or got shot down, scrape it off and put a new guy's name on it. So the names didn't stay there forever.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing is, with a lot of these airplanes, you didn't know which airplane you were going to fly, whatever was available. So you didn't that everyone thinks like with like Top Gun, right? Maverick goes out and Goose, and they get in their airplane and they have their own permanent airplane, and everybody flies everything. And you may be Bob or George or whoever, but they don't really.
Maintenance tells you what tail
right.
numbers are.
Whatever works, and there you go.
I had an airplane with my name on it. I think I flew it 3 times.
3 times.
That was it.
There you go. You got the Hollywood shot, right, with the flight helmet in front of it.
Because I didn't think I'd ever get a chance.
Well, there you go. So you went through. So this is just a little bit of history about the airplane behind us. It is a monster. It's the largest single-seat fighter ever built by the United States Air Force, I think.
Built by anyone.
By anyone.
Single engine, single seat. Largest.
Really? The Russians didn't build anything bigger either.
They started putting two motors in.
That's interesting. And it was originally built as a low-level nuclear strike airplane, right?
Hence the Bombay.
Right, which is real fun as you're trying to restore the airplane, and they've cut every hydraulic line in it and everything, and you're trying to get in to clean it up, right? That Bombay is interesting. What? So you went through, your flight training, got your wings, escape and evasion. Did you go through escape and evasion training after that?
Oh, sure.
Where'd
Stead
you
Air Force Base.
Where'd you do that?
Stead Air Force Base.
At Stead?
Yeah, me too.
But you too. What did you go into 105s immediately,
No,
or
I was flying the F-100 out of Okinawa, and
Really?
and the wing that I joined right after I joined it as a brown bar, the wing was converted to F-105s. So within probably 6 months of getting to Okinawa, I got out of the F-100 and into the 105.
that's like going from a Yugo to a Mack truck. I mean, that's a big shift.
When I landed in Okinawa, the wing commander, who was Gabby Gabreski.
Really?
Yeah, I said he wanted to meet me because I was a brown bar, and he said, "You got to be the luckiest brown bar in the world, because this wing is going to 105s." And I had what, a year, maybe a little less, in the F-100.
Did you get to know him at all?
I flew with him one time. Scared the hell out of me. He was one of the roughest pilots I've ever flown with.
Really?
He didn't do anything smooth, nothing.
It was
I
really
shouldn't- I guess
just
I shouldn't
really
say
rough
that.
with the air.
Yeah.
Describe rough so people non-pilots understand.
Very rough with the controls.
Just very abrupt.
The wingman hated to fly with him because he didn't consider them at all. He just went out there and flew. And I was in the back seat of an F with him, and I was scared that the whole while I was there, I was scared that he was going to kill me.
Really?
But he was a very nice guy. Very, very nice guy.
Gabreski was obviously out of World War II, a major ace.
He was a full bull, and he had our wing.
Yeah, and I think, I'm gonna, maybe you correct me if I'm wrong, but he was in P-47s, wasn't he?
P-47s. And I
There
think
you go. I got lucky.
He had a number. I mean, I think like 25 or 30 kills in World War II.
Really, those guys were larger than life, weren't they?
His
Robin
son went
Olds
into the
and
Air
those
Force
guys.
also.
Yeah,
had a good
he's
career.
still around. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, Bob Friend told me a story one time about he landed when he got in. He was in P-51s, and the commander came to him, and basically his wingman wouldn't stay with him. And he said to him, "Your story reminded me." He looked right at him, and he just brand new. He looked at me and says, "You're my wingman, and if you don't stay with me, you're fired." And that was, I can imagine, that's not fun flying for the commanding officer.
Yeah.
So, Gordo, how did you end up in 105s?
Well, I went to pilot training at Del Rio, Texas, Laughlin Air Force Base, and when I graduated, I was first in my class, and we ended up having 8 first lieutenants, which we were when we graduated, or at Nellis anyway. 8 first lieutenants got into a class that went through training at Nellis and then to Tockley, and then they split us up to 3 different squadrons, 3, 3, and 2. But of the 8, 5, we beat the odds. It was a 50-50 deal, going over there to whether you can get
50-50 that you're going to get
100 or die or be a
100,
POW.
and you had to explain how to get to 100. People don't understand that.
A counter was a mission over the boundary of North Vietnam, and we got 5 of our guys made 100. 2 were POWs, and 1 just the airplane blew up out of the sky. They hit it with a big piece of AAA. Later on the second tour, Gary Smith was one of us that made it, and he flew a F-4 and ended up bailing out, and in South Vietnam got picked up. He's still around. But I think Gary and I are the only two of the 8 that are still with us. Bob Lodge was a legend in his time. He was a lieutenant with us, academy graduate. I tell stories about him. We were going through training at Nellis, and he says, "You want to go gambling with me?" A guy had a locker.
Could count cards, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I said, "Sure." So we walked up to the Stardust, and the big burly guy says, "You're not welcome here." So he was not, because he never lost money.
Really?
And on our 100th mission, I was on the board as lead, and he was the wingman. And I pulled off, and he says, "You got one 750-pound bomb hung on a MIR, multiple ejector rack on the center line." And I said, "Well, just move out of the way and I'll toggle it off." He says, "No, 1G, no flaps, 240 max." His mind just knew what was in the book. He was just that
Wow.
smart a guy. So I did that, and then we changed leads because we'd practiced the 100th mission with him in the lead. I'd rather fly the wing anyway. And we beat the airfield out.
Well, I imagine in this airplane. So before the did either one of you though train in what the airplane was designed for, with the nuclear strike, the low level?
Oh yeah, that's all we did on Okinawa. Okinawa wing was nuclear deterrent, and we had 18. I guess it's okay for me to say that now. We had 18 F-105s with Mark 28s, 1.1 megaton in the bomb bay.
All
And
the
they all
time.
had a target. Yeah.
So they were hot loaded.
Yes.
Wow.
And we would go out and start them once a day, just to make sure that they were working. And our targets were in the Vladivostok area, North Korea, and China. And we
The one thing people may not understand, by the way, for those of you who are watching this, if you want to ask questions, put questions into the comment section. Greg will bring them over to me, or let me know if you've got questions. There's no problem. Go ahead and ask the questions, because we're just having a conversation here, and I may forget something or not ask something that you're interested in. So ask questions. So there we go. Being by an airfield, we just got 2 Flak 38s, and they're off camera here. We almost shot a steerman down yesterday who kept interrupting it, or last week when we were doing this. So hot loaded, which means you have a nuke on board.
Yes.
You couldn't tell your family, right? I mean,
No, they knew. My wife and I
Did
children
she?
knew I was, because we had 4 or 5 days a month that we had to sit alert 24/7. So we were in an alert facility, sleeping with 2 or 3 guys in a bunk room, and we'd have exercises every now and then. The bell would go off, and we'd pretend that we're going to go ahead and fly a mission.
When you do something like that, I guess the airplane, and again, guys, you did it. I'm just kind of going off memory here. Airplane was low-level strike, right? So nap of the earth, going hot.
When we got near the target. Normally we went high enough because we were pretty far from everything, so we had to hit a tanker.
You hit the
Tankers came
tanker.
out of Japan. We'd hit the tanker, and then we would go as far as we can, high altitude, because, well, it didn't matter. There was nobody coming back from those missions.
Why don't you talk about that a little bit as to why? You got a
So it was the end of the-
1.1 megaton bomb
1.1 megaton bomb.
in the bay.
And they were all laydowns. We would fly in real low, and our targets were almost always airfields. And we dropped this 1 megaton bomb, and when it came out of which is, by the way, being in the airplane when you drop that thing is an experience. It came out of the airplane, and a parachute opened up. He had a hardened nose, and he would pitch down and dig a hole in the runway. And 60 seconds later, as we were going as fast as we can, 1.1 megaton bomb would go off. That was not, we would probably survive that, most of us. The problem was, now here we are in the Vladivostok area, North Korea, or China. How do we get back? And the targets that I set, there was going to be a destroyer or a submarine at a lat long in the China Sea.
So waiting for
we'd
you,
go
and you
there
ditch
and
the
eject,
airplane,
yeah.
and the I got very lucky when I was young. I got into a B1A when they were putting the software in, and I've always been a little bit of an airplane freak. We were talking about that before we started, and so they briefed me about the sensors in the airplane, the ability of that airplane to fly nap of the earth with the sensors. You have, a Doppler in this? A Doppler?
Yeah, very good with Doppler. Yeah,
Doppler?
excellent.
The Doppler down low, did that give you train following, or were you
We
flying
had
stick?
Doppler got us to the target, but we had the radar had the had a floor in it. So we could put a floor in it. We would go down to that floor and stop, and it would keep you safe from hitting the ground.
Really?
Yeah. And it didn't work all that well because it was way ahead of itself.
Yeah.
Did you ever try and fly it?
Well, we
Not
did this.
very well.
You're asking a question. We did this in training only because they wanted us to get familiar with the airplane. The first 100 hours, no, not 100, some small number of hours, we were in the back seat of the F model at Nellis. They didn't have any D models at Nellis. They were all at Tockley or Corrado,
Right.
Codina. But so we would sit in the back seat and practice the nuke deliveries, but mainly it's just to get a feel for the airplane.
Really?
Yeah.
What airplane? You obviously got a burner,
Yeah.
and it was always always interesting to me that this airplane has a gun and the F4 didn't, right? Which
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense at all.
So,
But and the Russians are, and we'll get into Vietnam here in a minute, which is a completely different animal. But Russian air defense, primarily SAMs, MiGs, and
Guns.
AAA,
AAA was the real
boxed AAA. In other words, they're trying to get
that was the real threat.
was a AAA.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they were, for the folks at home, what they were trying to do is they use, I think, and again, this is from what I have read, you guys lived it, but they box you in with those, with SAMs or whatever and try to get you to fly through the AAA, right?
Yes.
And hit you going through it is,
Well, the threat of the SAMs, at least when I was there, forced you down low.
Exactly.
And that's where the flak was the most,
Yeah.
the most dangerous.
Yeah, you would have, when we'd come back, we'd say, well, that was a AAA day or a MiG day, which you'd hope it would be, because they wouldn't shoot anything into the air while the MiGs are up, and you could evade a MiG pretty easily. But on a AAA day, it was Katie bar the door.
really,
Yeah.
Or they
that's
could put up-
scary.
They could put up flak.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And they didn't have smokeless gunpowder. So when a flak site was firing, it was literally a cloud of white smoke and these fireballs coming out of it, and usually going right at you as you dove in there. That's the other thing that most people don't realize. My daughter was talking about the Navy during World War II, and she said, they used to dive. So that's what this airplane did, probably better than any other airplane. It was an excellent bomber and a dive bomb, period. It was, you would put 8 750-pound bombs on the target.
Just iron bombs,
Yes.
not guided.
Yeah,
We didn't
dumb
have them.
bombs.
No.
Okay. So did you guys know each other when you were in the service?
You were there very.
I was there in December 66 to July 67
I
for my
got there
first
in
tour.
early '65. We arrived at Da Nang in January of '65
Okay.
in South Vietnam.
So let's transition. And by the way, the three people that are, we get really down in the weeds on this stuff, and that's why we do this. We're going to talk shop. The three people that are on YouTube channel have all lapsed into a coma by now, I think, probably because we're talking tech here. But all right, so nap of the Earth, nuclear delivery systems. Now we're going to Vietnam,
Yeah.
right? You got a huge airplane, heavy bomb load, and carry a lot of bombs. There's a big transition from, flying airfield disruption or whatever you're doing with a nuke to having to go do precision strike. What was that? I mean, you were there early, so what was that transition like?
We never recognized the ability of the airplane conventionally until we got to Vietnam. I had never flown with an MR, multiple ejector rack with 8 or 6 750-pound bombs before I got to Vietnam.
Really?
We would drop 1 750 at a time for practice, when we were on the gunnery range. So all of a sudden we're taking off at 52,000 pounds with all these bombs. And if we didn't get water, we got afterburn. If we didn't get water, we aborted because the airplane would not get airborne.
Really?
So it was a real awakening for us. And that's when I began to really appreciate this airplane until you start doing that. And then when you get to the target, which Doppler would get you right there, and you got into a dive, you were going to put bombs on the target unless you did something wrong. It was very accurate.
How about you, Gordo? Any observations?
Nothing to add to that.
Really? So so you're flying heavy, and when you fly an airplane heavy like that, you were talking about trying to get off the ground, right? So,
Absolutely, yeah.
so in an interval like that, you're going. You got a heavy bomb load. You're going off the deck. You're taking off. Minimal fuel, and then you hit the tanker.
Yes, we hit the tanker, usually on the Thai border, on the Thai side of the border with Laos, and then we go to our target.
And then, so now you're full of gas.
Not necessarily full of gas, but topped off.
Topped off
We
to-
got 4,000 or 5,000 pounds.
You got enough to go in and then egress from the target. What was with you at that time? I've never really understood how the North Vietnamese used their Air Force. You know, they had MiGs, and we have a 17 and a 21. I don't know if they had 15s in the arsenal or not.
There was talk about them, but I never saw
Really?
or heard of them.
And then you got SAMs. Those are SA-2s.
Yeah.
And then obviously all kinds of different caliber AAA. What SEAD, did you have air defense suppression go in with you, or would they beat the target up early, or fighter
I
escort?
can't speak for.
We were going so far north, we were the only ones there.
Same with me.
The-
I never was escorted with anything.
Yeah.
We'd run an F-4s occasionally, but they were loaded with bombs too.
Really?
We were preceded in the target area by Wild Weasels, and their job was to get the SAM sites to radiate and fire, and then they had missiles that they could fire at that site that launched the missiles. The problem was it was sort of like feeding a kitty, a big kitty, a lion, because you have to get inside the lion's cage,
Feeding the kitty.
Yeah, inside of their arcs of their ordnance to fire your ordnance, because we didn't have any. We had one large missile, a harm, that would go in about 25, 30 miles, so you could kind of do one-to-one that way. And you wanted to get rid of it because it was almost as big as one of these fuel tanks, and it was
Really?
a lot of drag.
So a HARM, homing anti-radiation missile, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's talk about Wild Weasel for a second.
Yeah.
Who came up with the name Wild Weasel? Do you know? Would you just? We have to figure that out, Greg. I'm going to look at you. At some point, we got to figure that one out.
I don't know.
So, Gordo, you flew Wild Weasel, didn't
Second tour, yeah, but the war was basically over when I got there.
you? Okay, so why don't you go through the concept for people that don't understand? Wild Weasel, you're flying a strike mission. You're in a big, heavy airplane. They're going in ahead of you, and
Yeah, well, the Weasels, you got a two-seater. The guy in the back is an Ewo, or a bear, we'd call him.
bear.
Bear.
Trained bear.
And we'd call
Trained bear. I like that.
And he'd call us the frogs.
Really?
Yeah. So anyway, a very good relationship. So there was a 6-month training course to become a Weasel at Nellis before you went, and for my second tour before I went back. But you take off. Generally, 20 airplanes go, D models go in the morning and 20 in the afternoon, and 4 or 8 Weasels depending upon crew availability and airplane availability.
How many missiles did the Weasels have per aircraft? Just one, or?
Well, it depends on the configuration. Generally, you'd have 2. You could have the Shrike, which was a short-range missile,
Right.
and didn't really bother you to fly with the Shrike. It was less of a bother than a full fuel tank. But if you had the big one, the HARM, it was really a drag to carry it around. It was like, I think, 1,700 pounds or something like that. So if you got rid of it, now you were a lot more maneuverable than you were with it. So
Okay.
you wanted to get rid of it as soon as you could going inbound. And your idea,
There we go again. The fun of living on an airfield.
is there an airport around here?
Yeah, there might be.
But the thing with the harm, you wanted to get rid of it, and so the bear would be back there listening to signals and trying to pick out, and you could program the harm to where you wanted it to go. You couldn't do it with the Shrike. The Shrike, you just lobbed it up. You got your nose 20 or so degrees up, and then pickled it, and it fell, and it flew into a basket. It all depended on the dynamics of when you launched it, where it was going. And hopefully when it's nose down, there's somebody down there radiating a signal that's tied to the frequency in the seeker. And that's a gimme too, because there's 4 or 5 different ranges of SAMs, frequency-wise. So if they're not on the same frequency as the Shrike, it just goes inert. But the key is they knew they could see on their radar when you pulled up and when you fired something, and so they would generally go off signal at that time, just shut the thing down.
Well, and that's kind of whether you hit them. We'll talk about the technology. Whether you hit them or you get them to turn their radar off you, they're still blind at that point.
Yeah.
And for the folks at home, the emitters on these SAMs would emit a certain frequency that the planes would sniff for and look for. Was it a high? Do you remember it was a high band frequency or what was it? Do they know?
There were, I think, 2 or 3 different versions of what was in the nose of the Shrike, and it picked up certain frequencies. And if they were using a different frequency that day, the Shrike was basically blind. It was just going to nose over, hit wherever it was going to hit.
Really?
Yeah.
And then, so you fire the missile. The missile goes at that emitter. It doesn't go after the rocket.
No,
it goes after the emitter. And then when it gets close, it has ball bearings, or it wasn't a strike weapon. It was like it would spray, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It had like something in it that would just fire a radius, because what you're really trying to do is destroy the dish or the truck, right?
Yeah.
Knock him offline.
Yeah. Well, it was going after that radiating dish. That was the only thing it was looking for. That's the only thing it knew in the world was where is that dish on the ground that is sending a signal to the rear end of the SAM to send it to the airplane. So
and people don't understand another fallacy in movies is the missile follows you all over and does the Wile E. Coyote and all that stuff. It'll just get close, and if it gets close, it's either going to miss you or it's going to blow up or do something else, right?
I've got a story about that. I was on the wing of a Weasel one mission. We were north of Flood Ridge, and the guy in the back seat of the Weasel said, "Launch, 10 o'clock." He had a real high-pitched voice. And so I looked over at 10 o'clock, and lo and behold, there it is, like a big white telephone pole coming out of the sky about 10, 15 miles away. And I watched it nose over, and, of course, the lead now is nosing down, doing a glib 2 maneuver. I'm not sure what glib meant, but it was the nose over to get yourself some airspeed so you could later on turn hard. So I looked over, and it was coming down, and I said to myself, I'm here at kind of line abreast. I said, well, he's not going to get both of us. So I did a big barrel roll and ended up back here so I could see if he's coming after me or my flight lead. Well, he was after the flight lead. I got to see the greatest air show you've ever seen. The 105's down like this, doing maybe 550, and the missile's coming here. And just before it got there, he did the glib 2. He went a hard G, and the airplanes, even the 105 with these little wings, can outturn a SAM because the SAM just got little small wings.
Right.
So I saw the airplane from the rear go up hard, a lot of contrails on top, and the missile went this way and exploded and actually sent shrapnel into the rear end of the airplane. And so the kid in the back seat said, "We're hit." And so I escorted him back. I think we went to somewhere in northern Thailand to land, but he made it out.
He made it out.
It was leaking fluid everywhere, but made it.
Well, that's the thing I think that's probably a misnomer.
Gentlemen, we actually have a question from our online audience. It has to do with it. We're getting a little bit of the political here, but the Johnson administration and the restrictions on the ROE that were placed upon targeting. They'd like a little bit of insight into your experience.
I would be happy to talk about that.
All right. Well, let's. Greg is off camera. The Johnson administration and the targeting restrictions. So
like handcuffs.
Handcuffs.
There were circles around Hanoi and Haiphong that we were not to go inside of because there were Russians there.
Right.
And
we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Same reason we didn't bomb the airfields, because they were Russians. We didn't want to hurt or upset the Russians. And so one of the saddest commentaries that later on we find out from reading General Piotrowski's book that our targets for each day were sent to us from the Pentagon, but really through the White House, Pentagon, and then to us. The targets were JCS targets, were what they called the big ones, the serious ones up close to Hanoi. And we thought, well, okay, we're going to go bomb those and everything will be this way. And we knew we were going into the most heavily defended area in the history of aerial warfare. And oh, why? Because our leadership, and it was Dean Rusk, I think, was the one in this interview with Peter Arnett. Dean Rusk was asked the question, is it true that you're telling the North Vietnamese what the targets are? And he said yes, because we didn't want the North Vietnamese people to be hurt by the bombing. Altruistically thinking they will go away from the target area if we tell them what it's going to be the next day. Well, what that really meant was they take the pintle hitches that were on all the AAA, drag the guns around, so that now they're firing in a small area of North Vietnam. So that's why it was the most heavily defended area in the history of aerial warfare.
So they knew you were coming.
Yeah, it was like telling Berlin we're going to bomb Dresden tomorrow. So,
right.
But that was the politics of the day was we're not really in a war. We don't really want to. Until Nixon got in, and I got a story to tell about that also.
Well, tell it. Let's
Okay.
do that. I want to talk about this shoot down and some of the other stuff. But
Okay.
what about that?
Well, Nixon got tired of Kissinger and Le Duc in Paris having tea every day and nothing happening. So Nixon told Kissinger, tell them to come across with a true bargaining position or else. Well, they didn't change anything. And so they still had the advantage because they knew where the targets were. They were coming ahead of time. So Nixon, however, actually had cut that off. So now they didn't know where we were coming. So they did not respond to that entreaty from him. And Nixon said, he called in the JCS and said, I want you to win the war. Well, how novel is that? Nixon said, win the war. So in December of 1972, he allowed us to now bomb the airfields, and the circles around Hanoi and Haiphong went away. We bombed targets right near the center of Hanoi and Haiphong. The POWs were doing this because they knew we were going to put some real pressure on them, because all they could hear before this was bombs off in the distance. So after 28 days of bombing the hell out of them, they did this in Paris, and they signed a peace accord. And I'll tell you what, we just don't do a good job teaching history around in this country. We were at peace with them as peaceful as you can be compared to North and South Korea, with a North and South with a demarcation line. We were at peace with them from about January to June of that year, because they had said, okay, we don't want to get bombed anymore. So we stopped bombing them. Everything was fine. And then what happened? Well, Nixon got in trouble with Watergate, and so he lost all his political power. And by then we'd gotten the POWs back also, which was a great thing. But,
right.
So with Nixon under all this political stress, the Democrats decided that they were not going to fund our half of the DMZ. And so the North can read the paper, and they saw that. And so they reattacked and took over, attacked Saigon and took over. So my story, and this is the goddamn truth, we won the war, if you can call Korea a win, it was a DMZ. We won the war, and then Congress gave it away.
Wow. Well, let's talk a little bit about, you talked about POWs, and both of you went through escape and evasion training. What I was told, and I've never talked to you guys about this, I was told by a guy who went through at the time that said, by the way, there's a very good RAND report about this, about aircraft that are shot down and what happened and guys that disappeared and a bunch of other things. And if you're out there, go out and find that. I can't remember the name of it, but it was done about 15 years ago, and it looked at all the American shoot downs and what happened to people who didn't come back and stuff like that. But I was told by one of these guys that was a Misty pilot, and we can get into Misty maybe if we have time, but he was told that if you see a Russian or a Chinese officer, you're dead. In other words, that you're going to go back to China or Russia, they're going to torture you, they're going to get everything they can out of you, and you're going to disappear. Is that accurate?
I have heard similar things, and I don't know any POW that I ever heard of who ended up in North Korea or China. So probably so.
RAND report was interesting because after the Soviet Union fell, they could get in there and they did all this, and a lot of those aircraft were black aircraft, right? They were on CIA or spy missions. And there was nobody had any idea how many of you guys might have, because people were flying them, how many of those airplanes got shot down. I mean, there were a number of them. And the Russians recovered the crews, and those guys just disappeared.
Yeah.
I've read about it, and that's about all.
So, Frank, you have the unique experience of ejecting from one of these airplanes. Do you mind talking about it?
No, not at all.
So why don't you take us through that, and then I'm sure we'll have some follow-up questions.
I'll make it brief. We were seeing a lot of the things that he was talking about as far as the missiles in the 30-mile circle. When I got to, I was there at the very, very beginning. I flew on the first mission, March 2nd, 65, into North Vietnam, just north of the DMZ, 40 miles. It's called Zombang, and we flew that mission, which was the first. Now, at the time, we were involved in Rolling Thunder, which was a joke. But every day that passed, we went a little further north. And then about 3 days before I got shot down, they fired a missile from inside that 30-mile circle and shot down 2 F-4s. And well, we thought, when we got back from that, I was flying that day, and we got back, we said, well, tonight or tomorrow we're going to go in there and get those missiles. They waited 3 days. That was on the 24th of September. We went there on the 27th of September. We may as well have sent them a telegram saying we're coming.
Yep.
So they put together 46 airplanes from Takli and Karat. We went to this area which is supposed to house the missiles, and they weren't there. There was white tree limbs and stuff like that to make it look like it.
They dummied them up.
And they got 6 of us. Out of the 46, they shot down 6. I was the only one that got hit and got far enough west so that I was away from the city. I was not in the city. And I was in some very thick stuff. I ejected at a very high speed, so high that I was blacked out for probably a number of seconds, because I don't remember when I came to in the chute. I don't remember hearing the airplanes go flying away, or I never saw my airplane. So I must have been blacked out for quite a while.
So you eject from the airplane. The airplane ejection seat has an automatic sequence. Separate from the seat.
Yeah.
Then
Opens your chute.
it opens your
Everything
chute
is
for you. You're out.
Completely.
You have a survival vest on, right?
Yes.
Did you have the radio?
Yeah, we had a spare radio. We knew that there was a radio in the survival kit we sat on, and we
Right.
all carried our own radio and water and things like that. And when I landed, I had landed in a real thick, it's called elephant grass. And that's what saved me, because they would have got me. I was 35 miles directly west of the center of Hanoi, which is pretty much, you're not going to get
You're not going to
picked
get
up.
picked up.
But the Air Force, they don't leave you. Having been there from January to July, I knew that when an airplane was down, it was all-out effort by everybody, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines. They were going to try and get this pilot out if he was talking. And I was the only one of the 6 that was talking. And
So SAR, Search and Rescue,
yeah.
got you, or came out for you. So you're in the elephant grass,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Can you hear them looking for you?
yes, the first hour or so, I didn't hear anything. It was very quiet. It was alarming to be. It was so quiet. It
Right.
was alarming. And then all of a sudden, I had 2 Navy A1s came in, and they picked me up within the first hour. Great guys.
Really?
Yeah, they were called Canesta Lead and 2. They got me. They told me. Lead told me, I got you. I see you. Which he didn't see me, but he was turning around me, and I looked up his wing and I saw him, and I said, "I'm looking right up your wing at you." And he says, "I got you," which was really satisfying for me, because I figured somebody knows exactly where I am. And at hour 3, now they worked their way up the hill, but it was pretty steep. And I had done this on purpose, try to eject somewhere where it was very thick and steep. I heard them, at first I just heard noises, and then one of the guys that was capping me said, "Hey, they just pulled a couple of buses up at the road at the bottom of that hill, and they're unloading people." I always wondered why they didn't shoot at them, but they didn't. Eventually, I could hear their voices, and then they started doing something that really scared me, and that is firing volleys of bullets, just full sight of firing and then stop. And then they'd wait a couple minutes and do it again.
So they were firing into the brush?
I have no idea.
Wow. So
it was-
you're talking. They kind of got an idea where you are.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about your compass.
Okay.
So
When I was on the ground, I went through all of my survival gear on my vest, but also all of the survival gear that had been seated on. And I remember, your survival school techniques come back very quick when you're on the ground. And I remembered that somewhere in there was a tiny little compass. It's about we call it a button compass. And what we were supposed to do was swallow it. And the reason we swallowed it was 2 or 3 days later, you'd pass it. And it was indestructible, I guess. And if you could find it, you kept it for the rest of your life, which I did. I still have it at home.
Gordo's really enjoying this one. Yeah.
Yummy, yummy.
Yeah, that's that's a good party favor. In fact, you did that to your kids. You told me.
I did. Years later, I never talked about Vietnam to my kids. And one of my daughters came in and said, today we were talking about Vietnam in class, and I told them my dad flew in the Air Force. And I remembered I had run into that, maybe a year or two before. I found it. And I ran upstairs and I got it and I came back down and I passed it around to all my kids and my wife, and they all looked at it and said, "Wow, that's really cool." Then I told that story and they were going, "Ah!"
Was it brown?
No, it wasn't. It's still, I take it here when I'm a docent.
Do you?
And, yeah, I show it. Give it, not all the time, but occasionally.
If you get an opportunity, come here, and you'll let them hold it, right? Yeah, there you go. So they come in, a helo comes in, a helicopter comes in, and you were in a harness, right?
It wasn't a harness. It was we call it a horse collar.
Right.
It fit under your arms. Very uncomfortable if you're in it for a while. And I was in it for 20 minutes, and it was extremely uncomfortable.
They hook you up, lift you out. Now
His hoist broke. The chopper's hoist broke. It was not a combat chopper. It was a cargo chopper that they had put there because it had the range to get up where I was.
Really?
And they got me about 10 feet off the ground. And all the while, they were shooting at him and the A-1s that were circling us. And he hovered there for about 20 minutes and then went over to a dry rice paddy that I had seen when I was in the chute on the way down, and landed, set me down in the mud. He landed next to me. I jumped in the airplane. And as I was diving into the helicopter, we could hear the automatic weapon from a little building that was at the bottom of this.
They're shooting at the helicopter on the way out. Did you go to a ship, or did you go?
Con Phanom. We went to the Con Phanom. Actually, we went to Vientiane.
Okay.
And the reason we did that was because the PACAF general, Hunter Harris, little guy, maybe 5'5" or 6. He was the 5-star general. He had come there to find out what went wrong yesterday. And I ended up, I smelled like a goat.
Yeah.
Obviously, been in this flight suit and on the ground and spend the night in Lima.
And you've just eaten a compass.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're probably not in a very good mood.
Yeah. Lima 36 night. Lima 36, Charlie, was the first night where I spent the night there. And then we went to Vientiane in an airplane. And I got to sit next to General Harris and tell him what I had done. Yeah, he couldn't have been more accommodating.
Really?
And he said, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "Get me back to Korat. Get me back to my squadron." And he did. He put me in the back of his C-135, which was highly polished for a 5-star general, with his seal on the side, and flew me back to Korat, and my squadron was there to meet me. Also, band. The Thai knew that this 4-star general was coming in. They had an army band there.
He had a band for you coming in. There you go.
And I was sitting in the back of this. There's some seats in the back of 135. And when I saw all of that going on, I sat back there. And he got out of the cockpit and he said, "Frank, come here." And he made me go out first.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
And that's a lot of talk has been about what I look like when I came out of there. And that damn Chuck Horner, who was on the same mission as I was.
Really?
Yeah, he said I had puke on my flight suit. Bullshit. I did not puke. I drank a lot of scotch.
Cover your ears at home. We just said bullshit, but there was no puke on your flight
There was
suit.
no puke. Dirt, filth, sweat, but no puke.
Chuck Horner. That name does ring a bell.
Oh, yeah, he's been here a couple of
Oh,
times.
yeah, I know who Chuck Horner is. Yeah, well, so let's talk a little bit. So did you just go back and you just went back to doing what you were doing?
Yeah,
or?
I was sore everywhere.
So you were sore?
I was very sore. I lived on sleeping pills and painkillers. And then 2 days later, I flew an instrument check ride because I needed an instrument check ride. Then I went right back to flying missions.
We don't have a hard out here. We're going to go a little bit more. We don't have a commercial or anything we got to do, so we'll keep talking for it because this is really good stuff. We haven't talked about MiGs. We've talked about SAMs. Yeah. We've talked about jinking and doing the things you got to do. People have a romantic notion of aerial combat and all that. How did the North Vietnamese employ their MiGs? Any observations on any of that stuff with their Air Force?
Well, they were generally in a two-ship, just two airplanes. And I remember one particular mission, I rolled in, and I was with the four-ship, and I'm going down 45 degrees, and something catches my eye, and I look out and say, there's a MiG-17 going down with me. I don't know what he's trying to do, maybe distract me, keep me from...
He's going down with you.
Right, yeah. I mean, maybe he's on the other side of the hangar far away, maybe...
Off your wing.
Off the wing. So I pulled out. But I had the really fun job of being Hank Higgins' wingman. And Henry Hank Higgins was just a rough-ass guy. First time I met him at Doc Lee, we were in the Stag Bar, and we started talking and drinking. And I noticed he had a G-suit with on his flight suit, he had the little knife pocket. And you don't keep the knife pocket on because you have a G-suit outside that has a knife pocket. So we got into he was a big guy like I was, and we got in rolling around on the floor, and I ripped his leg off and all this stuff. Next day I find out he's my flight commander. But we had a great time together. He liked to lead, and particularly lead formation landings. And I like to fly formation. I got so good at formation landings at Tok Lee. We'd come in, and just as soon as I saw the main gear touch, I'd wave at mobile, and then pull the drag chute. But Hank...
By the way, for people at home, that's not easy to do.
No.
Right. When you do this every day, things became simple.
Yeah.
But as far as MiGs, one day we were coming outbound, and Hank really wanted to get a MiG. He just was drooling to get a MiG, and we're coming outbound as a two-ship. We started as a four, but 3 and 4 go off their way, and 1 and 2 are here. And I'm over here, and I look down, I see a MiG-17 down there 3 or 4 miles away. I said, "Lead, there's a MiG 10 o'clock low." And so he goes in after him. And we're both, my gun camera film showed up on the cover of Aviation Week or something like that within a year. I've never been able to see it. I saw it in base ops somewhere, but I didn't write down what...
Craig, we should see if we could find that. That would be interesting if we could dig that up.
The picture on the cover shows a MiG-17 with smoke coming out the left wing, and the 105 in an overshoot. And that was my gun camera film showing that, because we'd both been firing at him.
Really?
So, but I went in and testified that he got that MiG.
Well, there you go.
And then a separate time, the day after they really had a bad day with us and wiped us off the face of the earth almost on a mission, we got some orders that we could go to the MiG bases and shoot at them. So we took all the bombs off. We just had AIM-9s on the wings, so we could go after MiGs, which you couldn't do with bombs. The gun would be useful, but the missile would help too. So I'm here's Lee, and here's 2, me, 3 and 4 are out here. We're going in through below an overcast, and I looked out, and I said, and because my missile is talking to me now, it's going row, row,
talking
row.
To you, which means it's giving you a signal that it's giving you a growl.
It's getting a heat source out in front of it. So I looked out and said, there's a MiG. He had just come out of the sky, and he didn't know we were back here, maybe a mile away. And I looked over at Lead. I said, why isn't he firing? Why isn't he firing? I said, oh, the hell with this. And I fired the missile off. And I watched it, and it was going right toward the MiG until it got very close, and the MiG must have seen it or something because he did a hard turn, and he outturned the missile. But
really?
That was...
That's a standard maneuver to break a lock. You turn into it with a real hard G.
Yeah. Then the last story that I had with the MiG, we were going in the water route, which was out and around, and then come in north of Haiphong to bomb a target. So we pulled off the target, and I was 4, because I was a lieutenant, and in front of me was a major on about his 4th mission, so he didn't know where the hell he was. But that's the way we did it for positioning and flights. So I'm 4, 3 pulls off, I drop, I pull off, and I look out and I see where we're going, and there's 2 MiGs in formation down there. We're just south and east of Kep, and they're like on outside downwind for Kep to go land. And I looked and I said, oh, goodness gracious, there's 2 easy shots, but he didn't know where he was. And I said, okay, and I told him to head east, and so off we went to fly east. But there was an opportunity wasted.
Well, it happens. Were they, Warsaw Pact, Russian doctrine, very command control driven, ground control, not a lot of initiative with like our pilots. Were they aggressive, or were they?
They were smart.
They were
very
smart.
Yeah. The first losses of 105 to MiGs was April 4th, 1965. And a good friend of mine, Jim Magnuson, remember I've been complaining about that MiG out there?
Yeah.
He got shot down. We were going to Thanhua Bridge, which is...
What he's talking about for the folks at home is we have a 15 and a 17 out front, and Frank goes by and kicks them every chance he gets. But
they shouldn't be there.
There you go. Well, they're outside. They're not in the nice, comfy hangar.
Anyway, we had about an 8,000-foot ceiling that day, and we went ahead and flew anyway, which is really stupid, because all the gunners know what your altitude is.
Yeah.
And out of these clouds comes 2 MiGs, and they shot down Jim Magnuson and Major Bennett. And Jim Magnuson was in the first class of the academy.
Well, they were
They were both
17s?
killed. Yeah, 17s. Yeah, we never saw any 21s while I was there.
21s?
Yeah, all 17s. These guys came out of the clouds, shot them down, and disappeared. And that was the end of that.
The guys told me that who'd flown against a 17, that a very capable airplane, very maneuverable.
Big guns.
The 21, he said if you see a 21 swailing, he's checking his 6, and a lot of speed, but get in, hit, and get out. I don't know whether that's true or not.
That's what when I was there. That's what they were doing till I left, and that was they were picking the most vulnerable moment for the Air Force pilot or Navy pilot, and that's when they would attack. And they'd hold their fighters off somewhere out of sight and wait for that one moment to swoop in.
Or
and
maybe
kill.
egress out of the target or whatever. What there's always stories of in like World War II, right, and in Korea a little bit with interaction with the enemy pilots. Was there ever any interaction
Not that I know.
with them or none of that? They were just really smart,
Yeah, sure.
good guys, good
Very,
or good
very capable.
adversaries.
Very, very capable enemy. Very capable.
Which is, if you think, if you read a lot, there's not a lot said about that. In other words, that the quality, and I've always been curious about that. So they were
Excellent.
quality aviators.
Their tactics were superb. They were better than ours because they kept outguessing us. No matter what we did, they would do something to counter it.
Gordo, what do you think?
Well, they had this little section of the war that they could send their best to instruct. They were instructing the North Vietnamese pilots. So you were getting the best. It's like Red Flag, or the aggressors.
Right.
They were sending their, quote, aggressor kind of people, quality people, to North Vietnam. So I don't know if they were flying the missions, but I assume they were.
Well, that was going to be you hit my next question, and we're going to wrap up. Russians? Do you think Russians flying them?
I don't know, but
They were certainly flying in Korea. We know that now.
Well, we'll never know.
We'll never,
We'll never know.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Well, you always want to give respect. You never underestimate the enemy, right?
Which we
Because
kept
that's how
doing.
you get
We
killed.
kept doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, guys, Frank, Gordon, appreciate it very much. Go Air Force. If you're at home, come and visit us. These guys are actually here. They'll talk to you, and Frank will let you hold his compass. We'll do that as a fundraiser. My name is Fred Bell. I am the vice chairman, if I don't get hung up on this chair. I'm the vice chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum. I want to thank you for joining us for another episode of Under the Cowling. Remember, go out to that Facebook page, smash that subscribe button, or like us on Facebook. Hit the web store. We can always use your donations. Thank you very much, and have a great day.